Test. Good. Okay, so we'll go ahead and get started. So we're in Zephaniah chapter 1. I think we finished verse 11 last week, so we'll start in verse 12. So the first part of Zephaniah is announcing a judgment on the people of Judah, and he references the day of the Lord, which he's going to talk about several times in the book. And for Judah, or for God's people, the day of the Lord is generally viewed as something positive. It's a time when God will punish his enemies. And for them, they usually viewed that meaning that God would punish their enemies, and it would be a good thing for them. But they never really considered the fact that they could be God's enemy. And so the day of the Lord that Zephaniah is talking about is actually a day when God is going to punish them because they have become God's enemy. And so in the first chapter, he tells us a couple things. One, he tells us when he prophesies, which is during the time of Josiah. And like we mentioned several times, he may be a cousin of Josiah based on on his genealogy. And if so, he would be part of the royal family and would have access to Josiah and be able to talk to him. And so the first part of the book is about a judgment that's coming against his people. And so we'll pick up kind of with that in mind in verse 12, which he's going to start a new little section here in verse 12. So actually, let me just back up and mention one thing. So in verses 8 through 12, he's talking about three different groups of people. In 8 and 9, he's talking about the wealthy people in the city. In 10 and 11, he's talking about the business people. So he's referencing the business district of the city. But when you get to verse 12, he's talking about a different group of people. And these are what you might call the practical atheists. So these are people that essentially they're agnostics, but you can call them practical atheists if you want. And we'll see what we mean by that in just a second. Okay, starting in verse 12, it says, "And it shall come to pass at that time." So what time is he talking about? He's talking about the day of the Lord. So when the day of the Lord comes, these things that he's about to say will take place. And this is God speaking, so it's first person where God's the speaker. It says that I will search Jerusalem with lamps. So when it says that God's going to search Jerusalem with lamps, you might think back to like Sodom and Gomorrah, where Abraham asked, can he find a certain number of people? Will God spare the city? It's actually the exact opposite now. God is going to search the city, but he's not searching for people to save. He's searching for people to destroy, okay? And so what it really is saying is that God knows their hearts and he knows their actions. And what they do and what they think is not hidden from God. And so therefore, everyone who is guilty will not escape his punishment. And so that's what he's getting at when he says he's going to search Jerusalem with lamps. He's going to find all the guilty and he's going to punish them. So the next line it says, "And punish the men who are settled in complacency." The word for complacency there, this is actually a metaphor. He's using an analogy of wine making and how you make wine. So if you have an old King, like an original King James, not the New King James, but the King James, it may have the word lees in it, which means what happens when and I don't make wine or know how it works, but anyway, what I read about it is when you make wine, you have to pour it back and forth into different vessels. Otherwise, you're going to get sediment on the top of the wine, which is called lees. And if the wine gets to the point that it forms that, then the wine is completely ruined, and you just have to throw it out. And so that's actually the word that's used there, but in the New King James and other translations, it just goes with the word complacency, which makes more sense in modern English. But what is he saying? He's saying that these people have become worthless, okay? These people that are complacent, and we'll see what he means by complacent in a second. But if they become complacent, then they're worthless for God, okay? So it kind of calls to mind Revelation when God says, If you're hot or cold, but since you're lukewarm, I'll spit you out of my mouth, and it's sort of the similar idea. They are, since they're complacent, they're useless to him, okay? And he's going to punish them and destroy them for their complacency. So then it says, who say in their heart, so this is what these people think about God. It says, the Lord will not do good, nor will he do evil, okay? So what is he getting at here? A lot of the people in Judah at this point had gotten to the point of saying, God isn't interacting with his creation anymore, okay? He's not going to do anything good for us. He's not going to do anything bad against us, okay? Now, the irony is as they're thinking that and as they're saying that, what is God doing in the background? He's plotting their destruction, okay? So he is doing something. They just haven't seen it yet. So he is actually active and planning things and doing things, but they don't know it yet. But as you kind of look at that verse, how many people in our society, even if they have an inkling of God or a deity, they think that this is how the deity operates? That the God, or God, if they believe in the actual God, maybe there's a God, but that God sits back and doesn't actually do anything, okay? And that's where a lot of our world is today, because they live their lives in such a way that they don't think God is going to do anything to them, okay? They don't think God's going to do anything to them in this life, nor do they think God's going to punish them in the next life. Therefore, they're free to live their life however they choose. And that's how a lot of people in our society think now. And so that is not a new way of thinking. That is how Judah thought at the time as well. And so God's people had the same problem, and God is going to destroy them for it. Okay, so as you move on to verse 13, it says, therefore their goods shall become booty, and their houses a desolation. They shall build houses, but not inhabit them. They shall plant vineyards, but not drink their wine. So he just got through saying, okay, God will not do any harm, will not do any good for us. He's not going to do any evil. And then in the very next verse, it says this is actually what God's going to do. Okay, so as they're sitting back thinking God isn't going to do anything, the very next verse says, actually, this is what God's about to do. So what is God about to do to them? So, they've built up wealth for themselves. They built houses. They built vineyards. And it says you're not going to live in it, okay? So these houses and vineyards are going to be completely destroyed, completely leveled when the day of the Lord comes to pass, okay? Now, the day of the Lord's not going to happen for a while. We don't know exactly when Zephaniah's prophesying, but if we just wanted to throw out a number and just say 630, something like that, BC. This isn't going to happen until 586 BC, okay? So you're talking somewhere in the 30 to 50 years later range, depending on what year this is actually taking place. But the idea is that it's imminent, it is going to happen, and it's going to happen soon, okay? And soon is a relative term, but it is going to happen soon. Okay, so we're going to now move into kind of a next little section. So it says, the great day of the Lord is near. So again, the idea of the day of the Lord. So he says it's near. It is near and hastens quickly. So the day of the Lord it's imminent, it's coming quick. It says the noise of the day of the Lord is bitter. And then it says there the mighty men shall cry out. So the mighty men, those are warriors. It's a typical term for warriors. And the idea is that once the day of the Lord happens, and it actually starts, that even the strongest men in society aren't going to be able to stand up against it. Okay, so once this actually takes place, their military won't be able to save them. Nothing's going to happen that's going to save them. It's going to be an inevitable destruction, just like God promised it would be. Okay, verse 15, it says, the day is a day of wrath, and it's going to do, spare me for a second for being a little nerdy here. This is poetry, verse 15. In Hebrew, every line starts with the same word, and it has the same number of syllables. So if you actually saw it in the Hebrew, it kind of be a little cooler than it is in the English. Every word, every line, there's actually 7 lines, but in English you only see 6, I think. Everyone starts with the word yom. That's the Hebrew word for day. You probably have heard of Yom Kippur, which means Day of Atonement. So every one of them starts with yom, and then it has a 7-syllable phrase that goes with it. Your English it'll say a day over and over and over again. Okay, so it says that day, meaning the day of the Lord, is a day of wrath. And then he's going to have 2 lines that go together, followed by 2 more lines that go together. So the first 2 lines that go together, it says a day of trouble and distress, a day of devastation and desolation. So the idea in those 2 lines, and you could even pair it with the first line if you wanted, is that the day of the Lord is going to be a destruction. Okay, it's going to be very bad. There's going to be a lot of, basically a complete wipeout. Okay, so the city's going to be destroyed. The people are going to be destroyed. The next 2 lines go together. It says a day of darkness and gloominess, a day of clouds and thick darkness. So people seeing that more of a cosmological type of thing, where it's the sky becomes dark and that kind of thing. And some people, and this may be reading too much into it, but some scholars suggest that this is basically reverting back to, maybe theologically, reverting back to the creation before God created light. So you had darkness in the beginning. And so what it's doing is it's taking man off of man's throne. So if you go back to creation, God, the highlight of creation was man. Man was the final thing created. And man was supposed to rule over the rest of the creation, okay? And so God is expecting the people of Judah to rule over his land that he gave to them. And part of man's responsibility is to rule over creation in a sense of taking care of it, but part of that is also taking care of each other, because we are also part of God's creation. So if you do not love your neighbor and help take care of your neighbor, you are failing in the purpose for which you are designed. And so Judah was guilty, just like Israel was, of not taking care of their neighbor. The wealthy oppress the poor, and so forth. And so some scholars see this as a way of taking man off of his throne, and it's reverting back to a time in creation when everything was darkness. That might be reading too much into it. But anyway, if you want to set that aside, okay, it's just a bad weather event where God's destroying everything, and you could maybe see that in it too. Okay, but the idea is destruction. Okay. Verse 16, it says, a day of trumpet and alarm against the fortified cities and against the high towers. So that is military language. It means that, right now when Zephaniah is speaking, Assyria is the world power, but we know from history that Assyria is going to be defeated by Babylon, and Babylon's really the ones that are going to invade the city later, okay? And so this is military language saying that when Babylon does arrive, that, you can sound the trumpets all you want, you can sound the alarms, it isn't going to do any good whatsoever. Babylon will destroy the city. The city was walled, but the idea is that your walls are going to be worthless, okay? So when Babylon does come as God's agent of destruction for the day of the Lord, your walls are worthless, okay? They're going to destroy the city and basically do whatever they want to do, okay? All right, so all of that idea is the day of the Lord, and in the day of the Lord, it's going to be terrible for God's people. God is going to destroy them, destroy the city, and there will be a remnant that will be taken into captivity, which he hasn't actually said that yet, but that's going to come here in a minute. Okay, verse 17, it says, I will bring distress upon men, and they shall walk like blind men. Now let's skip the next line for a second and jump down to the 4th line. Their blood shall be poured out like dust, and their flesh like refuse. The last line there probably has kind of the idea of dead bodies laying around. when it says refuse, it might mean one of two things. I'll try not to get too graphic. Either their abdomen has been cut open and their bowels have spilled out, or as they're dying, we might use the expression they pooped their pants, so to speak. Anyway, the idea is not very pleasant either way, right? So it's the picture of destruction, death, a lot of badness happening to the people in the city. But if you go back and you actually look at the middle line of the verse, it gives you the reason why all this is happening, okay? And it says, because they have sinned against the Lord, all right? So the whole reason for the day of the Lord is because they have sinned, all right? The people have not done what they were supposed to do. They did not keep up their end of the bargain. And God, in his righteousness, has to respond to their sin. So this is all their fault. They have brought this upon themselves. And so their sin is the real cause for everything that God is going to bring about upon them, okay? And I'll say a little bit more about that here in a second in the next verse. Sorry, my nose is running a little bit. Okay, verse 18. It says, neither their silver nor their gold shall be able to deliver them. So what that's talking about, a lot of times in the ancient Near East, a country would try to overthrow another country. They would try to overtake the city. But they could be bought out. So if you're invading a city and you try to set up siege against a city, if the leaders of that city walk out with a whole bunch of gold and silver and offer it to you, they might just leave and take the money, okay? And that would happen not uncommonly, okay? And so what Zephaniah is saying, you can empty all your money out from the city. It isn't going to change anything. God is going to still destroy the city. So if you go back and you look at like verses 9 and 10, 10 and 11, when he's talking about the people in the business district, and he's talking about that's going to be the first part of the city that's hit, and they should wail and all this stuff. And they will wail, but not because the city's being destroyed or they're being taken captive. They're wailing because they're losing all their income. And so the idea is you have put all of your heart and your effort and so forth into all your wealth. But when the day of the Lord comes, it's not going to do anything for you, okay? And of course, the obvious application is for us, you can get as much money as you want. Once Judgment Day hits, you're not going to buy God out. God's decision will have nothing to do with how much money you got. And so they're going to find this out the hard way. All right, so it says, third line, verse 18. In the day of the Lord's wrath, but the whole land shall be devoured by the fire of his jealousy, for he will make speedy riddance of all those who dwell in the land. Some translations may actually say earth there, and so it gives a little bit of confusion to like, oh, it's just like another flood type situation or whatever. And that's not what he's talking about. He's just talking about destruction in Judah for the people's sins. So maybe the New King James does a little better idea capturing the thought here. But I want to kind of hone in on one thing here. So in the previous verse, he said that all this is because of their sin. But in verse 18, when he's talking about how God is going to bring his wrath out upon them, he says it's by the fire of his jealousy, okay? So I kind of want to park there for a minute and talk about what it means for God's jealousy, because it causes people some problems. I think I've mentioned this before. I'm not going to say who it is, but there is a famous celebrity from basically my hometown, or very close by, who said that they did not believe in God anymore, or at least the Christian version of God, because they couldn't really follow a God who could be jealous, because that's a very petty human emotion. So why would you want to worship a God that's basically childish? Okay. And then I actually saw a social media post just yesterday that said the same thing, essentially. So obviously this causes people issues out in society. More likely they're just using this as an excuse not to follow God. But anyway, nevertheless, it's probably good for us to at least know what the word actually means and what it's talking about. So the problem is our English, what we say is jealousy in modern day English is probably not the right word. What we're talking about is envy, okay? So what is the difference between envy and the Hebrew word that we translate as jealousy? Envy is when something rightfully belongs to someone, but you want it, okay? So for instance, Parker and I both like to collect Bibles. We're probably the only two in the room, but anyway, that's fine. So if Parker has a really nice Bible, and I look at that and I think, man, I want that. Not only do I want that, I'm a little annoyed that he has it and I don't have it, okay? And it's not so much that I couldn't go buy my own copy of it. I want his because I want to have it and him not to have it, okay? That is envy. And so in that situation, the Bible rightfully belongs to Parker. It does not belong to me. But I want to claim it and take it from him, okay? That's envy, all right? What is jealousy? Jealousy is when something belongs to me, but it has been given to someone else, and I want it back, all right? So what does that mean in terms of God? Let me pause for a second. When you became a Christian, just like the Jews here, you signed a covenant with God. You may not realize that's what you did, but you signed a contract, okay? You didn't sign a piece of paper, literally, but effectively you signed a contract with God. So what is the basic contract that you signed when you became a Christian? Your basic contract is, I will be your servant if you will forgive me of my sins, make me righteous in your eyes, and as long as I stay your servant, you prepare a home for me in heaven. That's the contract, the gist of the contract. It's got some more detail to it than that, but that's the gist, right? So each party gets something out of the contract. God gets a servant. You get a loving God, okay? Now, who got the better end of that deal? By far us, okay? Does God need any of us in the room? No. Do we all need God? Absolutely, okay? So, what does it mean for God to be jealous? Well, once you've signed the contract with God and you are his servant, then that means all of your praise goes to him. There are things you're expected to do as a result of being his servant, okay? So, specifically for praise, that praise goes to him. Your love and adoration for a deity goes to him. What if you take that love and adoration and praise and you no longer give it to him, but you give it to a different God? How's God going to feel about that? What you have done is you have taken what belongs to him and you have taken it from him and you have given it to someone else or something else, okay? And that is where God becomes jealous. He wants what rightfully belongs to him, okay? And if you take what belongs to him and you give it to someone else, he becomes jealous for that, all right? And that's what jealousy means. So this is not a petty, childish emotion where I want to take Parker's Bible from him. It is taking from God what rightly belongs to God, okay? Now, can we do this today? And the answer is yes. Okay? We are God's servant or slave, whatever term you like or dislike, use the other one. You are God's servant. So what is it that God expects of you that you could take from him and give it to someone else or somewhere else? Well, definitely he expects part of our time, right? So every day he would expect for you to pray to him, possibly read the scriptures, spend some kind of time in meditation and devotion to him. What if you take that time and instead of doing that, you say, I don't feel like doing that today. I'm going to watch TV instead, or I'm going to play on my phone instead, or I'm going to exercise, or I'm going to work longer at work, or whatever. It doesn't make any difference. You take that time that you're supposed to be giving to him, and you take it from him, and you put it in a different direction. Is God jealous of that? And the answer is yes, he is. Okay. What if you take the love and adoration that you're supposed to give to God and you give it to somebody else? Does that ever happen? Well, sure. What if you, instead of going to church, you decide to go do something with your family or your friends? That would be the same thing. What if, on a deeper level, you get involved with other humans in whatever way, a marriage, a friendship, whatever, with people that you shouldn't be with, and that causes you to leave God and no longer love God, and instead you take the love you're supposed to be giving to God and you give it to a human. That human has now become your idol. Okay? So there are many, many, many ways that we can rob God of what rightly belongs to God and give it to something else, someone else, and in the process, God becomes jealous. Okay? Now, what happens when God becomes jealous? Well, at some point, his wrath will be poured out. And that is what's happening to Judah, okay? Judah has taken the things that rightfully belong to God, removed them from God, given them to Chemosh, or to Malcolm, or to Baal, or to their own ego to try to make money, whatever the case may be, and they have left God and they have chased these other things. Now God is jealous, and God has given them ample opportunity to come back, and they have said, no, thank you. In fact, they have just said, he's not going to do anything about it. And now God is saying, all right, well, the time has passed. I'm just going to destroy you, okay? And that's what all happens for all of our lives. At some point, for each of us, the time will pass, and we will die. And at that point, there is no way to remedy the situation, okay? So it's better, obviously, to not ever get to the point where God has to become jealous of you. So I assume everybody in the room looking around, you are Christians, you have signed a contract with God. Don't void the contract. It will be the biggest mistake you'll ever make, all right? So keep the contract, keep in God's love, keep in God's grace. Now, the flip side of this, we've only talked about the negative, which is if God becomes jealous, then he has to eventually pour out his wrath. What happens if you never void the contract? What's the flip side or the opposite of the wrath? It's the love and the grace, okay? So you're about to see how bad the wrath gets, but if you never go down that road, what does that tell you about how great the love and the grace is? It's equally, if not more, strong in the other direction, right? So if you've signed a contract and you're keeping up your end of the contract, God will always keep up his end of the contract. You don't have to really worry about that. That means you're abiding in God's love and God's grace, way beyond measure and anything you can fathom, okay? And that's where we all need to be. So what we all kind of need to think about is, okay, are there times where maybe I am robbing God of what God deserves? And we need to do a little self-reflection and be like, okay, maybe I need to set my phone down for a little while. Maybe I need to turn the TV off. Maybe I need whatever. And spend a little more time with God and a little less time with, frankly, nonsense. Okay? And that's a lesson for all of us. All right, I'll get off my soapbox. Any questions on chapter 1? Yep, John. Okay. Okay, yeah, if you didn't hear what John said, if you go back to earlier before the people invade Canaan and take the land, they're actually promised that when they go in the land, they will inherit houses they didn't build, vineyards that they didn't make, and so forth. And so when they went into the land, I forget, I think they only burned a few cities, I think maybe 3, but don't quote me on that, but it wasn't many. Most of them, they actually went in, destroyed the people, and took the city. So it's like just walking into a ready-made city. The buildings are already there. The gardens are already there. The vineyards are already there. And you just walk in. It's like ready-made and ready to go. And so that is what they inherited when they walked into Canaan. But like John is saying, they're going to walk out of Canaan or Judah with everything they have built destroyed. All right, so it's the exact opposite. They walked into a ready-made civilization. They're going to walk out with their civilization they built destroyed. Okay, so it's going to be a huge slap in the face to them to watch everything that they've worked for go up in smoke, literally, because the city does get burned. So that's a good point. Does anybody else have any comments or thoughts? Okay. All right, we'll briefly move into chapter 2. Did the first bell ring already? Not yet, okay. All right, so chapter 2. Chapter 2, the first 3 verses are going to start off in a different direction. So chapter 1 is all about the day of the Lord, the coming judgment, badness, badness, badness. So chapter 2, though, the first 3 verses, is your first hint at there actually will be a remnant, okay? So not everybody is going to get destroyed. And so there's a little bit of hope here in the first 3 verses. So it starts and it says, gather yourselves together, yes, gather together. And the Hebrew word for gather there means gathering like chaff together. So if you're a wheat harvester and you're gathering all the wheat together, the chaff is the garbage part that you don't want to keep. And so it's basically God saying, I'm going to gather together, all of you worthless people. So it says, gather yourselves together, yes, gather together, O undesirable nation. And the word nation here is very key. There's a couple different words you could use for nation, but Zephaniah uses the word goy when it's singular is goy, and that means, it always means the pagan countries, okay? It's never used positively when you talk about Israel or Judah. If that word is used for Israel or Judah, it is always meant to be an insult and a slap in the face, okay? So even today in Hebrew, if Jews talk about other countries, they call them the goyim, or goy is singular, goyim is plural. Even my professors, when they were at Hebrew Union, which is a school in Cincinnati, a Jewish school, in chapel, they would talk about the Goyim, which are the non-Jewish people, the non-Jewish countries, okay? And so for Zephaniah to call Judah the Goy means you're just as bad or worse than all the pagans are. And so it is meant to be a slight. It's meant to be an insult. Okay, but we'll go on and see what he has to say. He says, before the decree is issued, meaning before the day of the Lord actually hits, it says, or the day passes like chaff, before the Lord's fierce anger comes upon you, before the day of the Lord's anger comes upon you. Okay, so he's painting this picture of you need to do something before the day of the Lord happens. Okay, so the whole chapter 1 was about the day of the Lord, and this is all these terrible things are going to happen when the day of the Lord hits. Now he's saying, okay, wait a minute. You need to do something before that day of the Lord hits, and what is it that you need to do? Well, verse 3, it says, seek the Lord, all you meek of the earth, who have upheld his justice, seek righteousness, seek humility. Is that bell 1, by the way? Okay, thanks. Seek righteousness, seek humility. It may be that you will be hidden in the day of the Lord's anger. All right, so there's a couple things to point out. One, it says it may be in the next to last line of verse 3. If you have another translation, it may say the word perhaps, okay? So Zephaniah is not giving them a 100% guarantee that even if they're in the remnant, that they will escape the destruction that's coming, okay? And we all know this from reality. In war, innocent people get killed, all right? And so he's saying, just because you're in the remnant, it's not a 100% guarantee you're going to make it out, but you got a better shot, all right? And that's what he means when he says, it may be that you will be hidden, all right? So what he's doing is he's painting a picture here that there's going to be a remnant, and God will offer protection in some way to the remnant, okay? Now, the protection that's going to be offered is one or two things. What actually ends up happening when Babylon comes in and destroys the city, some people are taken into captivity, which are, for the most part, the people in the city that Babylon can use, okay? So they would obviously you take the royal family, you take all the wealthy people, and then you take the people that actually have skills that they want of some sort. You're a builder, you got some kind of physical skill that they can utilize when they take you back to Babylon. So who does that leave behind? Well, basically just the poor people or the people that don't have some kind of technical skill that they can use. So, but the remnant could be two sets of people. One, the people taken into captivity, and two, the people that are left there to actually stay in Judah. Because Babylon didn't take everybody. They left a lot of people there, actually, to just stay in the land. So not everybody's going to die when Babylon comes. They're going to kill a lot, but they're not going to kill everybody. Okay, so with that in mind, what does he say they need to do? Well, first of all, he says, seek the Lord, all you meek of the earth. And then he says, you have upheld justice. And justice means you treat your fellow man correctly. And we talked about that earlier tonight, that part of man's purpose on the earth is to take care of God's creation. Part of God's creation is human beings. And so it is our responsibility to take care of other human beings as part of the creation. So justice means you treat other people fairly, and so that was a major problem in both Israel and Judah, was the wealthy people were not treating the poor people in the society fairly. And so that is one thing that qualifies for a righteous character, you might say, as you have justice. But he uses two terms. He says, seek righteousness and seek humility. And so we'll just spend the rest of the time briefly talking about these two terms. Righteousness means you are right before God, but what exactly does that even mean? Well, the Jewish people were in a covenant with God, and for us, for practical reasons, you're also in a covenant with God, okay? So anytime you're in a relationship with someone else, you are righteous in that relationship if you do right in the relationship, okay? So if you have a spouse, you're righteous in terms of the marriage if you are right or behave rightly with the other person, okay? In a relationship with God, which we all have since we've signed a contract, then that you're righteous before God if you're right in the contract or in the relationship. But the problem with the relationship with God compared to all other relationships that you might have with another human is only God gets to define the terms of the relationship. So when you're in a relationship with God, you've signed a contract, you're in a relationship with Him, He is the one who defines the terms of the relationship. So who is a righteous person? Well, a righteous person is the person who keeps the terms of the contract and the agreement that God has set forth. In practical terms, what does that mean? It means you keep His commandments, all right? A righteous person is the person who keeps God's commands, all right? And not simply keeps them. I mean, I can keep commands with my heart not being in it whatsoever, but you keep the commands because you love God and you want to honor Him by keeping the commands. So it goes back to the part we talked about earlier. You give to God what God deserves. And so I can keep the commands but not have my heart in it. Well, that means I'm still robbing God of the honor God deserves. You're only righteous if you both keep the commands and you do so with a right heart, okay? So that is what righteousness means. I know the second bell rang, so I'll just quickly say humility just means what you think it means, which is you're humble, you don't think too highly of yourself, you have a proper understanding of who you are as a human relative to who God is as your creator and your savior. And I'll stop there for tonight. Does anybody have any questions, thoughts, comments? Okay, good to see everybody. See you next week.